Recently I walked past a small hobby shop in a little town where I don't regularly visit. I glanced into the window and I saw this 1/18th scale brand new Ninco crawler sitting in the window. It turned out that some time previously the owner of the shop had removed and sold the rear steering servo and the radio receiver, and so I was able to buy this with no steering servo at the back and no radio receiver for a very good price. I then fitted a steering servo and bought myself a 3-channel radio. I thought I was going to be getting a 4-wheel steer crawler at a very, very reasonable price indeed, but I made a minor miscalculation. I'll just show you what I mean. Turn on the power. If I hit the 3rd channel button on the transmitter, see if I can keep them both in frame while I do that, the wheels slam round onto full opposite lock, and there's no way of having them pointing straight. I'm at my friend Adam's house. He's equipped to solder up these tiny servo leads, and what we're going to try and do is improvise a Y lead in such a way so that if I steer the front wheels to the right, the rear wheels will steer in the opposite direction, like that. So Adam's cannibalised a dead receiver and very cunningly improvised a sort of truncated servo Y lead. I'm impressed. Moment of truth.
Oh, he's come undone.
Damn. Ah, we've got it crabbing.
We've got it crabbing, but that'll work. For sure.
Excellent. Good work. We had the 4-wheel steer working, but the vehicle would crab from left to right. So we swapped round 2 of the servo wires, hoping to make the servo turn the other way.
No.
But for the moment,
Everything's dead now.
everything's dead now. So that's the end of my bold attempt to build an on-the-cheap 4-wheel steer 1/18th scale rock crawler. Actually, I'm not that troubled by not having 4-wheel steer, because what I want to do with this thing is develop it to a point where it can compete with my friend Adam's much modified lossy MRC, and he doesn't have 4-wheel steer, so I don't really want it either. Well, I think the first thing to do is to address the fact that this vehicle is currently dead. I suspect the problem lies with the ESC. I don't think the BEC itself is blown, but I think the speed controller part of it certainly is. Let's see. The old one is quite big as well. Let's chuck a new one on and see if I'm right. Oh good, it's not too big, it was just the box. Nothing, I was wrong. Got no steering. Oh, I've got throttle. Wow. Okay, I know what I've done wrong. I forgot to plug in the steering servo. This is interesting. You see the blue LED indicating that the receiver is getting power and it's switched on. The moment I plug in this servo, the blue light goes off. Comes on again when I unplug it. So I think this servo got fried during my ham-fisted attempts to give myself cheap 4-wheel steering. So what I'm going to have to do is try it with another servo, which I have here. Here is a brand new servo, straight out of the packet. Everything's switched on. Once again we see the blue LED. This time I plug in the servo and the receiver stays powered up. So if I turn the steering, nothing happens. I'll switch on the ESC. We have the blue light on the receiver. Now if I plug that into the channel 2, I heard the servo react. Please work, servo. It doesn't work. Just like the last one, it's self-centered when I plugged it in. The light's staying on, but the brand new servo isn't working. I'm starting to suspect that I hurt the receiver as well. I've ordered a new receiver for that 3-channel transmitter, but meantime, let's simplify matters by opening this brand new Fly Sky radio. The great thing about this is that it only has 2 channels. So there's no temptation for me to start fiddling and blowing up the electronics. My intention had been to fit a new servo and with that done drive this thing triumphantly out of the workshop. But unfortunately this servo measures 41mm across and it fits perfectly in this mount, and my replacement measures 45mm across. So I'm going to have to order a smaller servo before I can go any further. Good news! The new steering servo has in fact arrived. Bad news! It comes with a 4-wire plug. Black, yellow, white, orange. And I need to plug it into a standard receiver, which of course takes a 3-wire plug. So I think this servo was a waste of time. Well, after the disappointment of discovering that my new servo was the right size but had 4 wires instead of the 3 I was expecting, I sat down, went onto Amazon and chose my next servo very, very carefully. I checked that it had 3 wires. I tried everything I could think of to get the size of the thing. I need to know that it's 41mm or 45mm or whatever, but I kept finding that the details, when you click on more details, it told you things like the size of the package it would be delivered in, not the size of the actual servo. So in the end, with great care, I chose a replacement servo and it has just arrived. It's a micro servo. This is becoming farcical. Okay, I've realised that it's going to be too difficult to find the right size servo by simply squinting at tiny photos on Amazon and ordering whatever I see. So I've decided to fit the stock servo that I've already got hooked up, full size. Each mount for this servo is simply a plastic post screwed to whatever's underneath it by the end, so I can take this servo off and I can actually unbolt the servo mounting posts. I've whipped the mounting plate for the servo off the truck and I removed one of the 2 vertical posts. I fitted it with some servo tape and I could see that the servo was moving. I wasn't happy, so I took that off and I've got one screw in there. I've keyed the surface of the servo and the upper surface of its bracket and I've used epoxy. That's actually working a lot better than the servo tape was. After all that, what we've got is a stock, except it's only 2-wheel steer, Ninco Boulder. Fixing it required the replacement of the ESC, the receiver and the steering servo, so my attempt to go 4-wheel steer really did cost me. Right, what I'd like to do next is try this thing out as it is now, completely stock, before we go on and start modifying it. So I've stuck the ugly plastic lid on. Let's take it out and see how it goes. Here we are at my nearest rock crawling site. I brought my Ninco stone crawler along. It usually wears a 1/12 scale body, so I've hastily taped on a little Midnight Pumpkin body. steering has cut in on its own. That wasn't fair. Okay. As a quick way to lock the rear steering so that I could get on and film this test, I sealed the servo with superglue, took the servo saver off and superglued the shaft so it wouldn't turn anymore. But that glue bond has just broken. Still, from driving the two back to back, although the tyres look identical, I've an idea that the tyres on the Boulder, which is after all a more expensive car, are softer. So I wouldn't be surprised if this did manage to get up here where the stone crawler didn't. I think the tyres are stickier. So the Boulder wins out over the stone crawler. Let's see what it's like going back down this hill. Well, that came down. Well, that didn't go too badly. It does seem that this Boulder has slightly stickier tyres than its cousin, the stone crawler. However, the one thing that I really noticed about both vehicles is that they're so top heavy. I've been thinking about the design of their chassis. The twin vertical plate design seems to oblige us to have the battery right up here. And this of course is a NIM, which is even heavier than a LiPo would have been, though the other car has a LiPo and is still horribly top heavy. And the problem is, where else can you put the battery? After all, the space between the twin vertical plates is pretty much full up with gearbox, motor and drivetrain components. So it seems to me that the best way for me to get my centre of gravity down quickly, easily and vitally, after all those steering servos, cheaply, is going to be to just take the shocks off and run it with a droop setup. The other thing that our test run made plain to me is that I need to find a better way to immobilise the two rear wheels than simply gluing the servo. The Ninco stone crawler, which is of course two-wheel steer from the factory, uses this short bar that goes from here to a drilled and tapped point on the rear axle. Fortunately, the Boulder's axle does have the same hole, and although I don't have a bar because this bar is slightly too long, I reckon I can shorten this bar and use that to fix the steering straight to the axle. The other part of my mission with regard to this vehicle is to change the way it looks. I absolutely hate these garish pink bits, so I'm going to take the bead locks off the tyres and paint everything pink, some other colour. I also really don't like the look of this body. I'm determined to try and come up with something that looks a bit better, and if I can make this look like a 1/12 scale crawler in the process, so much the better. One problem that's become apparent since I removed the shock absorbers is that the vehicle now tends to tie itself up in knots. I think a bit of tension rather than compression where each spring used to be might help equalise everything. So I've had an experimental idea. Let's try. Oh, the rubber bands actually work surprisingly well at keeping it all centred. Well enough to have convinced me to do what I've just done, which is to go on Amazon and order myself a packet of small tension springs. While I wait for those springs, however, I can concern myself with another matter, which is how I want this vehicle to look. This thing is from a WL Toys 18628. It's left over from my 1950s six-wheel drive truck build. I've noticed that I've pinched quite a lot of screws and even components from it, but I'm pretty sure I could fix it back up. And this is the interesting bit. It happens to fit on here reasonably well. I think I can do something with that. The first job then will be to trim off the bits I don't need, such as these spare wheel supports. I don't want anything raising my centre of gravity. And the next job is to sort this out. I might even be able to find this part. I probably just took it off because I stole the screws for something else. I've put through a 3mm bolt, which is threading directly into the green plastic and passes easily through the styrene, and then these two cable ties. Okay, I think it's time for me to take everything apart and paint it all. Here's the cage after one coat of grey plastic primer and two of gloss black. Returning for a moment to the question of locking the rear steering, I've removed its servo and made myself a little aluminium bar. At the second attempt I managed to drill a hole in the right place so the wheels are completely locked straight. However, I don't have a long enough screw of the right size to fix it in place. I've been up to the garage, I've taken screws out of old VHS machines, all sorts of things, dead toy grade RC cars. I can't find one the right length. The only one I have is doing exactly the same job on the back of my Ninco Stone crawler, and I have a policy of never stripping a running car to get another car running if it's at all possible. Here we are back with the stock rear end, the servo, holding the steering still by virtue of this arm. I have taken the spring out of the servo saver and glued all its components together, disabling it completely. So hopefully it won't start self-steering again as it did during our previous test. Next thing to go will be these diff protectors, front and rear. They're useful, but I know from experience that they're infuriating and constantly get caught up on rocks. So this is how far I've come. I don't think it looks too bad. Now, do I wait for the little tension springs to arrive, or do I try out my new droop setup with just the rubber bands? Let's test it. This is where it rolled before, which is why I was keen to bring it back to the same spot. I'll try a different line. Got wet tyres today and the rocks are damp. It's been rainy. glad that worked out. It is better than it was before I spent all that time and effort on it. Well, that didn't go too badly. The roof came off because it was only glued on, the rear steering servo cracked its superglue seal again and started self-steering, and those were the only two problems I encountered. I'll sort those out, and next time we see this, hopefully it will be doing battle with the crawler for which it was built to do battle. Thanks a lot for watching, see you next time.